Hello and welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. So, we've been trying to get various perspectives regarding the Israeli Palestinian conflict, and tonight we are continuing that trend. Our guest is Adar Weinreb. Adar is an Israeli living in Tel Aviv. While he was serving as a soldier in the IDF, he began to see himself in his sworn enemy and wondered if the only real difference between him and a Palestinian was which side of the border he was born on. Now, since then, Adar has been involved in peace building between Israelis and Palestinians since 2014 through his YouTube account, Sulha, which is the Arabic word for reconciliation. And there, Adar works to bridge an understanding between people in conflict around the world with a primary focus on Israel-Palestine. Now, he says there is no security better than peace, and I couldn't agree more. Really looking forward to getting his perspective about how the Israelis are doing and feeling and what they're hearing about this conflict and what is going on in Gaza, what solutions there might be for this conflict, and much more we're going to be talking to Adar about tonight. So really looking forward to his perspective. But first, let me tell you guys about the sale that is finally here. Field of Greens Black Friday sale is on. You do not want to miss this. Right now, you can get up to 30% off when you use code VIP. Now, I love Field of Greens, and I have been seeing incredible results. This is a fine powder made from whole fruits and vegetables. You just mix it up into your ice water, and you are getting your daily needs when it comes to fruits and vegetables. It's really difficult to get all of them in our diet, and Field of Greens makes it really easy. And for me, when I drink my Field of Greens, I feel more energy throughout the day. I definitely feel like my skin looks healthier. It helps with digestion. Your hair and nails grow faster and look healthier. So it just have a better feeling of health overall. And I do notice an absolute difference when I drink my Field of Greens. So try it out. This is going to be one of the best things that you add to your life for better health. So don't miss this massive sale and get up to 30% off your order. Visit fieldofgreens.com and enter the promo code VIP for this special offer. So that is fieldofgreens.com and enter VIP as a promo code for that 30% off. Let me tell you about debt. You don't need me to tell you about debt. You probably, wrestle with it when you think about it going to bed at night. You wake up thinking about your debt. Debt sucks, right? High interest credit cards and loans make it nearly impossible to pay off debt. And insane inflation keeps us stuck paycheck to paycheck. Well, the system that traps us is debt, and we want to get out of that system. And Done with Debt is your lifeline. Done with Debt has an ingenious new strategy to help erase your debt faster and easier than you ever thought possible. Done with Debt knows how to get debt out of your life permanently. Here's what they can do for you. They can analyze all of your debt options. They can reduce your bills. They can cut your interest rates, all without bankruptcy and without a loan. So Done with Debt, they are the experts in brilliant strategies for getting you out of the debt trap, but you do need to hurry because some of the debt solutions are time sensitive. So go to donewithdebt.com, find out how easy they make it. That's donewithdebt.com, and get yourself out of debt. Rid yourself from the traps of debt with donewithdebt.com. All right, guys, let's get on with tonight's show. Really excited for this conversation. Adar Weinreb, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Kim. Thanks for having me.
So I first have to ask you, is it safe for you to actually be talking to me? Because I've been seeing a lot on the news that anybody who's speaking out against the war, and I don't know if this is specifically with the Arab Israelis, but in the news saying that people who are speaking up are being rounded up, jailed, cited. Is there a real danger of that right now?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Israel did put on some new wartime law, and it's really gone. I would say right now we have some of the worst free speech laws in the world during war. It likely won't remain once the war is over, but we have seen that sometimes liberties are taken during wars and they're never fully returned. So I think it is reason for concern. Whether I'm personally concerned, I was warned against coming on for my own safety, but I'm not going to let fear stop me from speaking what I believe to be an important message and speaking my truth. So whatever the repercussions are, hopefully they're none, but whatever they are, I'm fully prepared for it.
Well, let's hope that there are not, because that would be definitely a violation of free speech. But you're right. In wartime, a lot of times countries will change their laws and say that you're not allowed. Like in Ukraine, we've seen the laws of you can't speak up against about the war in Ukraine, and people are being jailed for that. And seems to be a trend. It's definitely frightening because I know the United States gets involved in a lot of wars, and a lot of us would like to still be anti-war or speak up against wars, and so it's frightening. It's certainly frightening. Um, what is it? What is it? What's the temperature like there in Israel right now? We're hearing and seeing one thing here in the United States, and I'm wondering if you get the same news. If in Israel you're seeing the same images out of Gaza that we're seeing here in the United States, or getting the same stories from the IDF. We get a lot of stories from the IDF about like beheaded babies, burnt babies. There's a lot of stories that are coming out that are very that are meant for shock and to pull emotion out of people, to get people to support war or invasion. What are you guys getting in Israel?
Yeah, so things here are definitely tense. Israelis are used to war, so there's this mentality in Israel that when there's war, we band together, and then life goes on as usual, quite quickly within a few weeks. That's not so much the case this time. I think it's still ongoing, but the tragedy of October 7th is still very much weighing on people, especially because there's still 240 hostages. Almost every Israeli knows a hostage. Or knows a family member of a hostage, and most Israelis know somebody who was killed on that day. Not to mention, we have 4% of the country are currently in reserves and active duty military. A lot of them are in Gaza. So there's a lot of concern over friends and family who are currently in the war. In terms of what we're hearing in the news, I mean, there's definitely a lot of misinformation. So, and on both sides, I mean, Twitter is just. Can I curse?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Twitter is really just a shit show to an extent I've never seen before. But it's important for people to remember that, like, when countries are at war, it's not only a war over military advantage; it's also a war of narratives.
Hmm.
And both Israel and Hamas has incentive to exaggerate and a history of doing so. So if you ask the average Israeli about the atrocities that occurred on October 7th, they probably have a belief uh, that is potentially over exaggerated from what actually happened. Um, but it's also, we still don't have all the details. We know for sure there weren't 40 beheaded babies. We don't know the extent of the burning. If we know there were burnt bodies, we don't know if that was Hamas members lighting people on fire. We don't know if that's a result of tank fire, which we
Right.
know there was some amount of tank fire, specifically in Beirut. That's where we know for sure there was tank fire. Um, what I think is a more important focus, because it's unclear what the exact details are, based on what we do know for sure, based on just videos that were released by Hamas, which is all public, we know that an atrocity occurred. Um, the exact details might matter more to the international community. So we could see a reason for Israel to want to make this the strongest case possible at how horrific it was to gain public support. But Israelis, whether babies were beheaded or not, whether people were lit on, like, burnt alive or not, just the fact that 240 hostages were taken and 1,200 people were killed, that is enough to have public support across the board for what's happening in Gaza. So I don't think the exaggeration is really to convince the Israeli public. I think it's probably more so to convince the international community.
Right. Well, and that's why I'm wondering if you're getting the same propaganda over there that we're getting internationally, certainly in America, because obviously Americans being the largest supporter for Israel, I don't think any of this could happen without American support with the incursion into Gaza. I don't think that that would be something that Israel would do if it weren't knowing that it had the backing of the United States. So I think it's really important to Israel to gain the sympathy from Americans, and so there's a lot of that information. So I was curious if that same information is being shown in Israel. Um, so,
Uh,
w-
yeah, I mean, generally what we're seeing on the news now is they're talking about how progress in Gaza is going, and they're talking to families and survivors of the attacks just to get testimonials. They're not.
mm.
It's less the fear mongering that we see on Twitter. The media here is more like updates on Gaza, talking to families of the bereaved. That's generally what we're seeing on the media.
What about the deaths in Gaza from the Palestinian side, the children that have been killed, the elderly that are killed, the people in the hospitals? I mean, what kind of information are you getting on the news there?
They're not reporting, and here's the thing, I'm not watching a lot of mainstream media,
Hmm.
um, but I think most Israelis are quite skeptical of the numbers that are being released by the Gaza Ministry of Health. We do know from past conflicts, the number that Israel releases on deaths in Gaza is actually quite similar to what the Gaza Ministry of Health releases. So from past conflicts, it's not like there's much proof that they just over exaggerate the numbers. What I would say is maybe room for suspicion is the speed in which they can count count the deaths. So I'll just give you an example. There was the refugee camp that was bombed, and within hours they were able to report a number as to how many were killed. Generally speaking, if you do like a thorough counting, you can't know within hours. So I think there is a case to be made that the numbers might be a little bit exaggerated, but generally speaking, it's not the greatest concerns of Israelis. Israelis right now, and I'll try to break down this mentality, and I think it's very important to understand. Most Israelis, the overwhelming, overwhelming majority, do not rejoice at the death of civilians. They just view it as a necessary consequence of of doing what is necessary. So Israelis are convinced that no matter what, Hamas needs to be defeated, and they don't see any way to defeat it without there being some civilian death toll. Generally, in times of war, especially when populations are in conflict with one another, we don't view the we don't value the lives of the others to the same extent we value the lives of our own side, and that's clearly what's happening. It's not unique to Israelis. It's just that's generally how populations are. We value those closest to us. We have less consideration to those who are more different from us, especially if those are people we're in conflict with. So it doesn't come from a place of wanting to see civilians die. It's more so in seeing it as a necessary consequence for a mission that needs to be achieved.
What? Let's talk about the solution. What is how how do you get peace in this region? There's a variety of responses that I've seen from people. I was speaking to somebody last night, for example, who says the only solution is to get rid of all the Palestinians, that they need to be moved, that they need to go to Egypt or to Jordan, and that just to they need to somehow get out. Of course, that wouldn't be done voluntarily. It would have to be done by force if you're going to do it, or coercion, or fear, right, to get people to abandon. So that's one solution. A lot of people, you got Ben Shapiro here in the United States saying that pretty much, that there should be no Palestinian state except Jordan, and he would prefer for everybody to be gone, all the Palestinians to be gone. Um, that's definitely a sentiment. There's one state solutions, two state solution, federations. There's after this, so after October 7th, there's a question: is that any of that even possible? A one state or a one state, a confederate situation? Um, I mean, what is the sentiment that you're hearing? I mean, you're unique. Well, first of all, are you unique? Are you unique in Israel, being wanting to see both sides, wanting to build peace? Do you find yourself fighting with a lot of your fellow Israelis who are saying to you, Adar, you're crazy? I mean, how unique are you?
So I'm not unique in the sense that I want peace. Most people here want peace. I'm unique in the fact that I understand that Israel very much is part of the problem. There's this narrative that we've done everything we can, and it's just all up to them to accept us.
Mm,
Um, so there's while most Israelis want peace, very few are creative in what that looks like. It's more so we've tried, it's up to them. Once they acknowledge our right to exist, then we can have peace. And until then, we'll just need to continue to defending ourselves. So I am constantly speaking to Israelis, trying to give them an understanding of what more we can do. Because I think in any conflict, whether a national or regional, you should never depend on change for your condition to improve. You should always take responsibility. And there's so much Israel can do. And I'll get into how I think we need to start looking at this. There are people calling for the removal of Palestinians from the land. There are people calling for the removal of Israelis from the land. These people shouldn't be taken seriously.
Right.
We need to accept that both Israelis and Palestinians are here to stay. How can we build a shared future for both of us? For Israelis, our main priority is security. For Palestinians, it's justice. So how can we find a solution that provides justice for Palestinians and security for Israelis? There is a way to do this, and this is the framework we should be working with. There's an increasing movement in Palestinian activism that calls for the dismantling of Israel, and I believe that is also a viewpoint that shouldn't be taken seriously. First of all, it's not realistic. So Jews aren't going to consent to any solution that puts them in danger, and they don't have any reason to believe that they will remain safe on the land if they don't have a state that can protect them. So if we want, and we could get into that, but
Yeah.
if we want to transform Israel to be one that is easier for Palestinians to accept, dismantling it is not the way to do it. So Israelis are big on change, right? We've had 8 months of protests, Israelis rallying to change their government, but Israelis are not going to rally to put themselves in danger.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of activists around the world working to dismantle Israel, they should actually work with Israelis and with Palestinians to transform Israel.
Right.
So I tell Palestinians, the best thing you could do is to accept Israel's right to exist. And the best thing Israelis could do is to transform Israel to make it a state that is easier for Palestinians to exist.
Right. Right. I agree with you that there is definitely a push to dismantle Israel as a Jewish nation, as an ethno-nation. That is something that I experienced mostly in the international community. When I was over there in the West Bank in Palestine talking to Palestinians, they don't have that sentiment by and large. Maybe young people, when you go to the universities are always, kids are always more radical in their viewpoints. So in the university, of course, there was definitely more radical thinking. But by and large, the population of the Palestinians, when I would ask them, do you want a one state? Do you want to live together in a one state situation? And they all said, no, we want our own state. We want a Palestinian country. And of course, Israelis say the same thing. No, we want an Israeli country. So there's no appetite for a one-state solution. It seemed, from my perspective, this was 4 years ago. Maybe things have changed. I can't imagine they've drastically changed that much in 4 years. If anything, after October 7th, more so this idea of wanting to be separated. But when I came back to the United States, there was definitely a battle amongst those who were very pro-Palestinian in the United States, where they were calling for a one-state solution, that a two-state is just continued apartheid. And so my thinking was, yes, we should work within the framework of what the people who are actually living on that land want, right? That there's an appetite for a two-state solution, and that's it. That's the majority thinking of people. And yeah, you're right. There's fringe people on both sides that want to see the people go away. There's fringe Palestinians who want all the Israelis to go. And I'm like, well, where? And they go somewhere away from here, off the land. They can't be here. They're settlers. And then there's, of course, Israelis that say the same thing about the Palestinians. Just go, get out of here. There's a whole Arab land. Go somewhere else. Don't be here, right? But they're fringe. They are fringe. And they're loud. That's the problem, right? They're loud and they're fringe. I will say, though, I've transformed in the 4 years. I came back saying, no, two states the only way to go. These people cannot live together. They don't want to live together, so don't try to force it. I now have shifted my thinking, and it was only recently, only within the last few weeks, actually, where now I do think a one-state and an eradication of the ethno nation is the only solution. I think that you could do a two-state solution for a time period. It's probably the right thing to do at first, but I think you ultimately head to a one-state eradication of an ethno nation, and then whatever you call it is whatever you call it. I don't see any future in any other way, and the only reason is because of the resources. Palestine, how can Palestine ever be its own independent nation, truly sovereign nation, and yet have to beg Israel for all of the resources that a sovereign nation needs to be a sovereign nation, right? To like like the Oslo Accords, when you break it down, they were saying, well, we got to share, and Israel will be the ones that are kind of the custodians over the shared resources like water, airspace, borders, military, security, right? It would all be like Israel controls it all, and then Palestine kind of has its own. That to me is not a nation. That's not a sovereign nation. That's a state. So then it would have to be a state within Israel. Like it's like a confederation where there's like Jewish states and Arab states, but inside of this big, nation, and then everybody has their equal rights. So how do you envision it for the Palestinian? Like if there's a two-state solution, let's say, and you work with that, what would be a just and equitable solution for Palestinians? Would Israel still control all of the resources, the ports, the airspace, the borders, the security?
So right now, the way Israel justifies controlling all of that is because there's no security, right? They think that, and there's good reason for thinking this. It's important to understand that most of the policies that are harming Palestinians are justified by security. So Jewish
Right.
security comes at the expense of Palestinian freedom, right? So the safer Jews are, the more free Palestinians will be. This is also
Well, or you
one
could
way to.
say the safer Jews are, it's because the Palestinians are not free, right? It's like, well, because we've hindered
Well,
them to a point.
it's a
So now,
cycle. It's a cycle for sure,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
The less freedom Palestinians have, the more radicalized they become, the more likely that they're inclined to engage in violent acts. So I'm not saying there's a chicken and egg thing, and we're just stuck in the cycle that
right,
we care for our security, that radicalizes them. They lose hope. They attack us. We further justify our security. But something I do
right.
want to point out is that there's this notion that our goal is to just expand as far as possible. And Israel has always had some expansionist elements to it. There's always been a segment of society that has wanted to expand the land as far as possible. But the majority of the population, the reason they justify any policy is not from an expansionist perspective, it's a security perspective. And I'll just share one poll that came out this week. Only 20% of Israelis support building settlements in Gaza, right? So 80% do not want to build settlements there, which I think is a great sign. And 75% think Benjamin Netanyahu is unfit to lead. So it looks like we don't
Yeah.
know. We know what's happening now is tragic. We don't know what good will come of it. One good thing that we could almost guarantee is that this will be the end of Bibi, and I think it's long overdue. And we have, both Israelis and Palestinians have been plagued by bad leadership. Um,
Yeah.
in terms of like living in an ethno state, the majority of both populations want to live in an ethno state for different reasons. Um, we are two populations that are distinct culturally, different religions. We speak a different language, and we've been in conflict with one another for 100 years. There's a very deep level of fear, mistrust, and hate. And to think that being in a one-state solution where we're competing over control of the government and the military would just be kumbaya. There's no reason to think that that's how it's going to turn out. So there's immense fear and resistance to a solution like that.
Hmm.
That being said, the two-state solution also isn't popular. The majority of both populations, aren't so keen on the other side having a state so close to them for fear or because they feel like it's unjust, and they just want access to the whole land to visit family or holy sites. So I think we need to start being creative and looking at solutions like confederations or a
Yeah.
federation. The distinction would be a confederation would be kind of like the European Union, how you have many countries, but there's kind of cooperation between them. A federation would be more like the United States or Switzerland, where you have multiple states in the US or cantons inside Switzerland. You could have for example, a system of checks and balances, which allow for both populations, to self-determine in their own way, where they're not competing over control of government, whether that's having a Palestinian government, an Israeli government, and a shared government. Uh, it would require having less federal control and populations have more local control. I think this is really the way we need to start
Yeah.
looking at it. And it's interesting how unpopular it is, right? You have like the international community, they've kind of been just two states, zero creativity. That's just what they're stuck on. And you have this new wave of activists who are very like just stuck on one secular state, for all people, which is a great ideal, right? The idealist in me says, let's do it. But the realist in me just understands that that would be a disaster. And what I want to say to all activists, all people who care, it's important in our activism to be grounded in reality and pragmatism. Don't
Right.
just think what a beautiful, what the most perfect outcome you can envision is. Think of what is actually viable, what we can achieve, and I think that's really the way to make progress.
Well, it's unfortunate. So you're saying that this federation idea, which I think is the only way forward, and that's what I do think that. And you bring up really good points as to why there needs to be this sort of separation, and that there's different languages, different cultures, different religions, and that is, I think, what makes the region beautiful. There's the history there for all three major Abrahamic religions is amazing. Um, but so it's unfortunate. So you're saying that there's not very many people that want this, that want a federation or a confederation. I would think a federation probably more likely. So, well,
I agree.
kind of a blend, I suppose, but this is what I mean by a one-state solution. There's no way that you can create a sovereign Palestine without giving them access to what sovereign nations need, which is sovereignty over their resources, their airspace, their borders, the ability to build airports, the ability to have a military, the ability to trade and have port, right? All of these things that are being denied Palestine, saying, "Oh yeah, no, it's their own place, their own resources, it's their own government controlled this," but their government has to constantly ask from Israel, "Can we build water infrastructure? We need permits. Can we build?"
Hmm.
They're constantly having to ask another country, "Can we do this?" So it's not a real government, it's not a real sovereignty. That seems more like a state inside the United States, right? Where you're saying, okay, can we have this and that? And each state has a level of autonomy and its own laws, and some laws are in conflict with one another, like abortion rights or at the time gay marriage before it was, before the Supreme Court rulings. But so that to me seems the only real true path forward is to share and to allow that freedom and sharing while people govern themselves in their enclaves. And
Hmm.
really breaking up Israel into, certainly three states, maybe with Gaza being one state, West Bank being another state, Israel being another state, but maybe even more states. Maybe there's a desire to break up and have like 5 individual or 6 states that govern themselves and that come together in a federal government um, in Jerusalem. But that's so. Do you think this is a growing idea? It seems to be the only solution. I mean, everything's been tried for all these years. So yeah, come up with
Yeah.
something creative.
So it's interesting how, I don't want to say unpopular, meaning people know about it and are not interested in it. It's not yet popular because they don't know about it. There's no public discourse about this. I recently had someone on my channel by the name of Emmanuel Shahaf. He's one of the architectures of one variation of a federation solution, and I think he proposes, I think something like 18 or 20 different cantons within Israel. Um, so he's doing work, but it's a good question how to bring this to the forefront of discussion. I think part of it really comes down to just having better leadership. We Palestinian leadership primarily has had a goal of Israel ceasing to exist, and Israeli leadership has kind of just kicked the can down the road and accepted the status quo as the only possibility, without really making an effort to do something transformative to end the status quo, because the status quo is immoral, it's unsustainable, and will always produce more violence.
Right.
So we need to be dedicated to transforming. the country to be one that really allows us to have peace. And I say this to people all the time, here in Israel, because we have we're very dedicated to security, and for good reason. But there is no security better than peace.
Yeah.
Because even with a strong military like we have, we saw we saw that there's vulnerabilities. We do have people dying, and even when people aren't dying, rocket fire causes terror, causes trauma. We don't need to be living like this. And even with a strong military, that's not enough. Peace will give us long-term security.
Yes, just trying to get there is going to be the difficult thing. I think you and I are on the same page though with thinking that it would have to be some sort of federation or confederation. We just have to get other people, I think, to start even exploring that
Well, this
idea.
this conversation helps, you know. Like
Yeah.
part of it is people like us having this conversation, bringing it to the forefront. And again, I want to reiterate the framework of let's find a solution that allows Jews to be safe and provides justice for Palestinians. And also, let's think of solutions that are viable and also solutions that don't radicalize the population. So there's this unseen consequence of war and conflict, right? We have the numbers of how many people die, how many people are injured, but how many people are radicalized,
Mm.
right? How many people are traumatized? So currently, the Israeli population is the most radical it's ever been, and so is the Palestinian population. This is a consequence of conflict. And when Palestinians hear about calls for removal of the land, all that does is aid in their radicalization. And when Jews hear about dismantling Israel or removing Jews from the land, that just aids in the radicalization. And a radical population is less oriented towards peace. So let's think of solutions that don't push the populations farther away from each other, but rather bring them closer to one another.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and that I think that is extremely important to get to that. And I do think that, I do think Hamas needs to end. I think that government needs to be ousted completely, and the Israelis cannot be subjected to Hamas, and neither can the Palestinian people. They don't like it either.
Great.
Uh, they
No.
just have felt like they don't have any options. Palestinians have kind of run out of options, and they've clung on to desperate measures, and that's putting people in that position is only going to produce really, really horrible results. And that's what's happened to the Palestinian people. But Hamas has to go. I do think that working together, if the Israelis and the Palestinians created a one federation, for example, and they had a shared basic law amongst each then area can have their own laws on top of that, but a shared federal law that said that this type of radical extremism that the settlers going through and doing the things that they do to the Palestinians, and then the radical Hamas types wanting to go and kill Jews, those people need to be rounded up and held accountable for their crimes. It would be just no different than how we combat extremism anywhere in the world when they're living as your citizens under your laws. We have murders every day here in the United States. How do we deal with it? We go after the murderer, we put them in jail, right? We hold them accountable. And that would be the same thing. I mean, we're never going to eradicate, unfortunately, death, murder, atrocities. People kill like I said, in the United States, we've got people murdering people. In my neighborhood, people get killed. But we have laws, and we have laws that try to keep peace and security nobody can guarantee full security, right? I can't be told I'm never going to have somebody break into my home or try to kill me, but we could certainly try our best. I mean, that's what we do, and we'd round these people up and put them in jail. It would have to be the same sort of thing, trying to just go after them when they commit crimes. I think there would be a lot of people in jail at first, but I do think that it would calm down over time, and people would start to feel more secure, and they'd start to settle in to living together. But it would be a rough go. I don't think there's any, I mean, I don't have any thinking like, oh yeah, we'll just open up the borders over there and everything's going to be fine and everyone's going to be safe and it's going to be kumbaya, like you said. No, it's going to be dirty and ugly, probably for a couple of generations.
Right. That's the challenge, because the second it gets dirty and ugly, then the people are going to start voting for somebody who wants to create this the separation again. So people aren't going to
Right.
just exist, accept violence as like um, part of the norm, right? So like Israel is the second that whatever solution causes an increase of violence, you'll have some hardliner come along and be very popular because in times of war, in times of fear, that's who you vote for. So it's almost like we need to find a way that, and I do think there will always, whatever solution we find, there will be those against it, and they might try to disrupt the peace process through violence. I think that's inevitable. But if we could contain it to a small amount and be able to isolate these people and have both populations speak out against violence, I think that would go a long
Hmm.
way. I think one of the fears Israelis have, it's not just that um, civilians have been the primary target of Palestinian resistance. It's that it hasn't been condemned. So there's this idea. Not only has it not been condemned, it's often praised. So there's this idea in Israeli society that the majority of Palestinians support violence against civilians, and it gives them a very deep sense of mistrust. Now, it's quite possible that the majority don't support violence against Palestinians, but they're scared to speak up because sometimes it just takes a violent minority to have a more peaceful majority be scared,
Hmm.
right? So that it's an interesting challenge we have, but I think we need to um, whatever the solution is, it's not going to be an overnight solution. There needs to be a reconciliation process. I think
Yeah.
Israel needs to invest money into a reconciliation committee. I think there needs to be, like, I'll just talk about some good faith measures. I think we could do, and everything I'm going to say is relevant for both sides, but I'll speak to the Israeli side. Israel can acknowledge wrongdoing. It very rarely. I mean, I can't think of a time it's ever acknowledged wrongdoing towards Palestinians. It could acknowledge and teach the Palestinian narrative as legitimate. We could teach our citizens Arabic so we could actually communicate with the other side. It's hard to have peace with the population you can't speak the same language with. Um, we can we currently have this security apparatus in the West Bank that is keeping the 600,000 Jews living there safe. This security apparatus is seen as a protector to one side, but an oppressor to the other side. How can we maybe replace this security force with one that is seen as a protector to both people?
Hmm.
Right? A force that speaks Arabic as well, that treats Palestinians with dignity and respect. And when there's an abuse of power by the security force, they're held accountable. Right? So these are things we can start to implement to bring us closer to a peaceful resolution. And what I think would really go a long way on the Palestinian side is to really uh, renounce violence and accept Israel's right to exist. And I know that's hard. They see Israel as this evil entity, um, and that's why I think transforming Israel will help them
Hmm.
um, recognize Israel's right to exist. But the fastest way towards peace is really for that recognition and for us to begin these good faith measures on both sides.
Yeah, I think you bring up some really great things, and I think that if both sides were to really come to the table and create a solution, I do think it would be good for them to require schools to teach both languages. Kids that go to school in
Yep.
Israel must learn Arabic. Kids in Palestine must learn Hebrew, and also the education. I think it all comes down to education and teaching kids. That's what both sides say about each other, right? Well, they teach their kids to hate us. And
Right.
Palestinians say that about Israelis. Israelis say that about Palestinians. And both sides have videos of it. And, I mean, it's just really, but teaching the kids that, we are neighbors, we're a community, we actually share, we live together. And so we need to be able to communicate with one another. Also teaching them things like about the Holocaust and teaching the kids, and then also teaching Israeli kids about the Nakba, which is, I don't think you guys are even allowed to talk about that there. The trauma that the Palestinians have undergone, and also the trauma that the Jews have undergone. And all of that needs to be recognized, and a shared understanding and that will lead to, I think, the Palestinians say, well, you've been our oppressors. And they, I think, have, from my viewpoint, a legitimacy to that. And that's where I think, just like in the United States, dealing with Black Americans and white Americans and the history of Black Americans, and there needing to be that reckoning of and an acknowledgement of slavery happened, segregation happened, and it was wrong. And this one group did it to the other group. But we then move on, right? We have to move on. Of course, there's people that don't. There's people that don't move on, and they want to keep on talking about that, and they want reparations, and they want more something to be done to sort of correct that past. And you're always going to get those people. But by and large, the majority have just moved on and said, we're just having to live our lives now. Like, we recognize that we got to move on. And maybe there needs to be that same sort of education there. It's going to be really tough, though. I mean, you and I could sit here all day and talk about all of these solutions that we think are reasonable, implementable. I do think these are not like fairy tale solutions. I think these are real solutions. I think you're right. Like, the military force, the IDF, can't just be Jewish Israeli only. It would need to be recruiting from Palestine and creating a shared security force that is both Palestinians and Israelis together, looking for the security of the entire region, saying we collectively share these borders. We collectively want to protect these borders. All of these are, but realistically, what's going on right now in Gaza is it looks like Bibi is a crazy person. As you know, he's on his way out. Everybody knows he's on his way out. And when a person is on their way out is when they're the most dangerous. And it looks like he is trying to implement his ideology, what he's always wanted to see, which is, and he's one of those that I do think wants all of Israel to be Israel, and that there is no real Palestinian. He wants to annex the West Bank. I don't know if that was him or if him placating the more hard right people who really want to annex. But it does look like he's trying to somehow salvage his legacy a little bit by saying, well, at least I got all of the land, and then I could go down as that, in the end. I mean, do you think that's what he's up to?
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. I think that this is him saving face. It also helps explain the severity of the retaliation. After the attack on October 7th, he said, people will be held responsible, but now we're at war. And I could see some rationale to that, but it's also awfully convenient to want to wait, let people forget, let people forgive, and have a victory that he can show. I could very well see the general of the IDF, the Minister of Defense, the head of the Shabak. I could see them all stepping down once all is said and done. If anybody resists stepping down and tries to retain power, I would see that being Bibi. Hard to see, like, the personality he has. Hard to see him accepting wrongdoing and stepping down. I think he's hoping for a decisive victory that will save his legacy and will allow him to remain in power. Or at the very least, maybe he will step down, but I'll have this be on his legacy. So that kind of gets me to think that I think the concept of defeating Hamas militarily is extremely difficult. I think if it was easy, Israel would have done it a long time ago. But the fact that Bibi's legacy is dependent on it gives me some level of confidence that it might happen, because he would do anything to save his legacy at this point, and that is pretty much the only thing he can do.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what even defeat Hamas means.
Right.
And that's
who replaces
that's the
them?
Right. I think, well, that's an easier question almost. It's like, well, okay, you could get somebody, Palestinian Authority, or you get, who is it that's in prison? Barghouti? Who's the...
Barghouti, yeah. That would be interesting to release him and have him. I think that's a creative solution that, might just be what we need. Palestinians need a leader, a Nelson Mandela of sorts. And people get offended by the comparison because Marwan Barghouti is in jail for acts of terror. He has contributed to the killing of Israeli civilians. But
he was just so that people know, wasn't he the person who, the first and the second intifadas, he was like the leader in both of those, wasn't he?
Yeah. He was a big player there. but he's very well respected amongst Palestinians. He might be the single most popular figure, and people can transform, people can change. This is something that's unpopular. The whole idea that a terrorist can transform or change or moderate over time. I mean, we've seen this in many conflicts, and it's possible that Marwan Barghouti, at this point of his life, um, understands that we can't keep we can't we can't continue the violence. This isn't going to be the solution. Let's work to let's bring our society towards some kind of peaceful resolution. Again, this is all speculation, but there has been talk of him being a good leader to unify Palestine.
Except that's not what Netanyahu wants. And he made that really clear when he made the rounds here in the United States. He doesn't want a unified Palestine. He wants them to be separated still. He says, no, no, we can't have the Palestinian Authority ruling Gaza. We want a different group. And it's because he wants them
Right.
separated to keep them,
Well, he'll be gone soon enough, so hopefully
hopefully.
the next leader is more of a visionary and more peace oriented, right? That's all we could really
Yeah.
hope for.
I would hope that at this point, I would hope that Israelis and especially the Americans that really support Israel, I would hope that they'd kind of have an awakening at this point and realizing that it is existential for Israel at this point to come up with a political solution that works and that creates peace. That you cannot continue down this path,
Right.
that this is not
Right.
going to work. The international community is already turning. They're seeing what's going on in Gaza and they're saying this is not working and this is
Yeah.
atrocious and this is not the solution, right? So I think that there has to be some sort of awakening. I want to get into the your past. So you don't have an accent. I live in an Israeli neighborhood, so I know the Israelis have, I think, some of the most beautiful accents. Kind of sounds French, actually. Sometimes I get a little confused and wonder if they're French, and then I find out they're from Israel. They've immigrated here to the United States, interestingly, to avoid violence or to avoid their children having to go into the IDF. You did the opposite. So you were an American that then went and immigrated, or tell us your story.
Yeah, sure. So I am American Israeli. Father's Israeli, my mother's American, but I have deep roots here in the land of Israel. My family immigrated from Vilna, Lithuania in 1812,
Oh, wow.
150 years before the creation of the state of Israel. So I'm technically 10th generation Israeli, or
And that's
10th
before the
generation.
modern Zionist movement. I mean, 1812 was way before Herzl or any of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
modern Zionists.
It was before Herzl was even born.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I was raised with these deep Zionist teachings about our deep connection to the land, our persecution around the world, and the Holocaust, which destroyed half our population, and about the beautiful return to our indigenous homeland after thousands of years in exile, and how we still unfortunately can't live here in peace because the Palestinians won't allow us to. This was the narrative I was raised on. Um, and
In
I
America.
don't
So
think I was
you were born and raised in
about
America.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Born in New York, raised in New Jersey, and this was the teaching I got my entire childhood. I was never taught to hate Palestinians. I was taught that we need to defend ourselves against them, um, and I don't think I was raised on a lie. I think I was only raised on half the story. I
Hmm.
wasn't taught about the Palestinian narrative and why they won't let us live here. I just thought, okay, they hate us. They'll always hate us. We need to defend ourselves. So these teachings got me to um, when I turned 18, I could have gone to college like most other Americans, but I decided to move to Israel and join the IDF. This was fueled both by the fact that I was a very big troublemaker growing up, and I thought the IDF would straighten me up, but also just Zionism. I wanted to serve my country.
And when you were taught
Interestingly,
that Palestinians wouldn't let you live there, was it because they just hate Jews, or or were you told about the land battle? Like, what was the reason?
yeah, I think it was. We didn't really get into details. I don't think I had like a deep understanding, but it was more so. They don't want the existence of the state of Israel. They
Mm,
won't accept a Jewish state. Um, I didn't come from a family that was big on fanning the flames of anti-Semitism. You know, it's interesting. I think Jews around the world are a little bit more sensitive to anti-Semitism than Jews living in Israel. Um, I think this is like a side note, but you have like this popularization of like this new age social justice movement in the United States that's often described as wokeness. And what they do is they have these terms like racist, transphobic, or anti-Semitic, and they use it very liberally to describe anybody they disagree with as these as this term. And really, all it does is dilute the meaning of the term. It pushes people away rather than creating a greater understanding between people with different views. And I see this same trend amongst like American Jews and how quick they are to label things anti-Semitic and assume the worst about somebody's intention. And let's be clear, there's a lot of anti-Semitism,
Hmm.
but the way to deal with it is to engage with it and speak to people and understand the root of these beliefs rather than just assuming the worst about someone's intentions and trying to isolate them and cancel them, because all that does is fuel more of the same hate that we're seeing. Um, but in Israel, there's much less talk. It's like a very non-woke population, and you don't have the same amount of labeling and fear mongering around anti-Semitism. But the fear is more so just about the Palestinian population, the Arab world. If we don't defend ourselves against them, you know, we uh, will be killed. And interestingly, it was my time in the IDF when I started to see things differently. Not even serving in the West Bank, I just thought, you know, this is what we do. We have checkpoints, we search cars, you know, we're keeping. And I sometimes got in trouble for being a little bit too friendly. Like one time I searched a Palestinian's car, he had all this bread and cheese in the back, and I bought some from him, and they got mad at me for doing that. You're not allowed to do that. But, you know, it looked good. I was hungry, and actually, it was pretty damn good. And now, when I look at it, having like I was 19 or 20 at the time, having a 19-year-old just stop a car and search it, like obviously that's like demeaning to a person and causes them harm, and embarrassing, you know. Um, but my instance in the IDF, you know, I was guarding and I was bored out of my mind. And most IDF soldiers are 18 to 20, like we're kids. I was looking at this poster to pass the time, and it showed different Hamas training techniques. And there's a poster on the wall showing Hamas um, soldiers crawling through sand. And I looked at one of them, and I'd been crawling through sand that very same day, and I saw myself in my enemy. I started asking myself if I was born in Gaza, would that be me? You know, is the difference between us really dependent on where we were born? Does his family view him as a hero and me as a terrorist? Can that be? And this didn't change my view overnight, but it did plant a seed about how who we are and what we believe is really dependent on where we're born. And over the subsequent years after, you know, getting released from the IDF, I understood that the path to peace is paved through the humanization of the other. And if we could just work to get a better understanding of of the other side, then that's really the way forward. And you know, just a note on how polarizing this conflict is. Me sharing this idea, like this comparison between the IDF and Hamas, is deeply offensive to both sides. I say, how dare you compare a terrorist group to a military defending their people? Or how dare you compare freedom fighters to an oppressive military regime? Right? So even just that statement is infuriating to people and shows how polarizing this conflict is. But I think that uh, you know, instead of just trying to point fingers and show who's better, who's worse, who has more morality, who started it, we're never going to convince the other side that we're good and they're bad. It's just a non-starter. So instead of trying to decide that they're the bad guy and you're try to convince them that maybe we both have a legitimacy. We're both victims to this conflict. Acknowledge that we've both done wrong, right? This is really the way how we could humanize each other and meet in the middle and build a future together.
When you were in the IDF, did you see anything? I mean, there's stories that we hear from IDF soldiers, like in Breaking the Silence, for example, that of atrocities that were committed against the Palestinians or that were committed against IDF soldiers. Or, I I mean, was your time in the IDF at all eventful? Did you see anything like that besides guarding checkpoints?
Um, the most eventful stuff was in terms of interactions with Palestinians was serving in the IDF. We had another instance where I two Palestinian kids were, I don't want to say they were arrested, but they were held overnight for throwing stones. And I was responsible for checking on them every few hours to let them pee. And it was a full night sitting in a van, zip tied, blindfolded. Which again, stone throwing stones is wrong and can actually kill. People have died
Hmm.
from throwing stones, but does a night in one sense you could say, okay, well, that punishment will get them to think twice, but that punishment is also very likely to radicalize them and have
Right.
them give them more hate for the other side. So I think there's a big question as to what a response to violence is. And just another instance, they said I should bring them food and I should bring them pita and hummus, very basic food. And I decided I want to bring them some Jello and snacks, and they got upset with me for that as well. I was giving them a little too much goodies.
Yeah, you
Now,
you and food,
interestingly,
you know.
yeah, yeah, right, exactly. I'm a big foodie. As a reservist, I served in 2014. I served on the Syrian border, which was uh, quite interesting. We very much got to watch the Syrian civil war. We got to see the Syrian army battle Syrian rebels, and at that point, we were also shot at on a few occasions. So that was also an interesting time. But thankfully, in my time in the military, I did not get hurt and didn't hurt anybody. Um, I don't think I left with any trauma aside. I've lost four friends to terror or war, so I definitely have losses from this, and we all do. Um, but I feel blessed that I came out relatively unscathed.
Have you been able to go and actually go into the Palestinian territories, like spend time in Ramallah or any of the areas that are controlled by Palestinians?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I'm gonna admit a crime right now because technically by law I'm not allowed to. Um, but I have gone to Ramallah before. Like Area A is Israel does not allow Israelis to go to Area A for security reasons. I went in with I had an American passport. I have an American accent. I was a little concerned I might get recognized because of the YouTube stuff I do, but I had a Palestinian tour guide, so I went and toured. I thought it was quite interesting, and I've been to other areas of the West Bank, primarily Area C. I've been a fair amount of meetups between Israelis and Palestinians. Um, and then one time in 2016, I did this social experiment. I went to East Jerusalem with a sign saying, "I'm a Jew and I love you. If you love me back, give me a hug." And I blindfolded myself. And people told me I would die if I did this. And we had a security guard who actually canceled on us that morning. So we didn't have security. I got there and it was just tense. I'm like, I can't believe I'm doing this, but I ended up doing it, and I ended up getting hugs. The video went super viral. That was back when Facebook was still a thing. It got, I think, 10 million views on all the uploads on Facebook, and they interviewed me here on the news in Israel, and I got a lot of outreach that people were just shocked and gave people really a sense of hope of what's possible, and that they don't all hate us, which is a common notion here. So I've done some interesting things in the West Bank. That was in East Jerusalem. That said, I wouldn't go do that hug experiment right now. Like things are certainly too tense, but
Right.
it was definitely eye opening. Yeah,
There's definitely, it is really unfortunate that the two people are kept apart, because that does breed and foment the fear and they want to kill us, they don't like us, they want to eradicate us, they want to, and that's, if you don't talk to people, if you don't have any face time with them, if you don't see them as humans, if you don't actually interact in a human way, then it's easy to just dehumanize. It's easy to turn a group
right.
into animals and think that they're just all vicious killers, right? Um, And look, like I don't have any skin in the game. I mean, I'm not an Israeli, I'm not Arab, I'm not Muslim, I'm not Jewish. I don't have any skin in the game at all. I'm an American. So my tax dollars go places, and I like to have some say, at least think I have some say in where my tax dollars go. But so I'm really neutral on this, and if anything, though, growing up more pro-Israeli, just because as an American, that's what we hear, right? In the news, we hear terrorists have attacked these, the Jews just trying to make a home for themselves in Israel, and they're under attack again, and it never ends. So we kind of hear this growing up. So if anything, we're kind of just preconditioned naturally to be more sympathetic towards Israelis and to Jews. And when I went over there, I'll be honest, I was scared. I was scared. I was worried. I was like, okay, I'm going into the West Bank, and all I've ever heard growing up is terrorists, and they're going to kill, and they could kill people, and they're violent and aggressive. And I naturally, also being an American, sadly, with the news and the way that it is, I had a bias against Arabs in general. We were growing up in wars with the Gulf Wars, and it's always the Arabs, and they've got suicide bombers, and they blow up their own kids. I mean, it's just the imagery, and what we hear is, it breeds fear, whether we want to be fearful or not. And so I went over there afraid. I was a little bit afraid. I'm a brave person naturally, but I was still had some reservations and was afraid. And I went there, and I mean, I fell in love with the Palestinian people. I mean, they are a wonderful group of people who are loving, who would give you the shirt off their back. They will overfeed you. You love food. They will overfeed you to the point where it's like way too much food.
Yeah.
When I was over there, they were telling us that they had a group of Germans that came to visit, and the Germans got mad at them, actually, because the Germans are so strict, German mentality. And the Germans went out, they were like, this is really wasteful, all this food. You guys give us too much food. We can't eat it all. And now we have
Right.
to throw it away. And this is like really wasteful. But, the Palestinian people are really, it really, for me, changed my entire perspective about Palestinians, about the conflict, and about Arabs in general as well. And now I don't have any real fear about traveling through Arab countries, or, even as a woman, worried, and I worried about that. Am I going to be, oppressed in some way, as a single woman traveling around? And it wasn't like that at all. I mean, it wasn't. So it to me is a shame. And then I went over to the Israeli side, went to Tel Aviv. It was beautiful. Went shopping in a market with a bunch of Israeli women selling beautiful jewelry. And Israelis are gorgeous, gorgeous. I mean,
Yeah.
Israeli women, I could see why you'd want to. I mean, it's like over there, it's just, the women are beautiful. The food is amazing. And, that was also really wonderful experience as well. And it's just such a shame. In the end, I just feel like it's just such a shame. Two groups of great
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. I agree. It's two groups of great people who have these beautiful cultures that have, call it an ugly underbelly that has been created by conflict. Um, and this doesn't need to be our destiny. And I think there's something that people, struggle to understand about populations. It's some of the kindest, most compassionate people you will meet have no problem supporting harm if it's somebody who they're deemed an enemy or a threat. And this is true across the board. I mean, let me just give you an example. When the U.S. invaded Iraq, 70% of Americans supported that invasion.
Hmm.
Iraq has never posed a threat, have never been in conflict with Americans, and all it took was some mainstream media narrative to convince 70% that, killing Iraqis is for the greater good. So imagine how amplified that is amongst populations that have actually been killing one another. So some of the kindest, most compassionate people you'll meet um, are not going to be kind, compassionate to people in their out group, people deemed a threat or an enemy. So the solution is to really extend our in group
Hmm.
to be the entire world and understand that we can build a world where that kindness, that compassion extends across the globe, and And that's really, I think, the world we should be building.
I absolutely agree with you. I just have to ask you one more question about your experience and you personally. Is that being an American, then you went and immigrated over there to Israel and served in the IDF? What is it you think in American culture that makes Israel so unique? I mean, to me, it's we're a country of immigrants in the United States. My family's from Vietnam. I don't have any feeling of like I'm not going to go serve in the Vietnamese army, right? I'm not going to if the Vietnamese government commits atrocities. I don't feel like I'm being attacked as a Vietnamese person if somebody criticizes Vietnam, for example. There's just like a very different mentality, it seems, when it comes to Israel and Americans who are not Israelis, unless all American Jews are told they are Israelis. What do you think it is that creates that unique? Before this, you and I were mentioning briefly, and it's worth bringing up that most people feel proud of where they're from, right? Most people are, oh, I'm an Italian American, I'm a Vietnamese American, or I'm a, people love their heritage, and I think that's one of the
Right.
biggest tragedies in the Black American community, in my viewpoint. One of the biggest traumas, collective traumas, in Black communities that has made it very difficult, I think, for real healing to happen is not knowing where you're from, not having that shared
Right.
cultural
Right.
pride of where you come from.
Mhm.
So it's an important thing. I think it's important, and I wouldn't want to eradicate that from our culture at all. And I think everybody should be proud of where their heritage is. But there is something unique about Israel in that it is perfectly acceptable for whatever reason for a member of the US Congress to show up to Congress in an IDF uniform. You would never see that if they showed up in a Chinese, could you imagine, or on a Mexican military uniform, or Cuban, I mean, it's just that's so. What do you think it is from being raised in the U.S. and then going over there? What do you think it is that is unique?
Yeah. So I think there's really two different things here. One is why politicians support Israel, and the other why American Jews feel a loyalty
Yeah.
to Israel. And as you mentioned, I think any American that has some other ethnic background will feel some loyalty, but not to the same extent. I think actually, for the most part, it comes from the perceived threat. So I think there were even some amount of Ukrainian Americans who went to Ukraine to go fight and defend Ukraine. And I think a lot of it really comes from there. It's that Israel, even an American Jew, they're not Israeli, but Jews come from that land. Um, Not only if you trace back our DNA, but like our language and our culture, our heritage, a lot of it traces back to the land of Israel. So American Jews are not Israeli, but they still feel like that is the land of their people. And the fact that it is under attack and faces threats, I think it really riles up the population and gets them to feel a sense of not only loyalty, but wanting to defend that nation. Um, Whether through activism or through moving there to join the military. And then in addition to that, I just think, you know, it's it's an awesome country, and Jews can move there and become citizens. So any Jew around the world has like a second option, a second country where they could become a citizen. And whether they want a fresh start or they're not happy wherever they're living, or they don't quite love the culture, Israel is a fresh beginning for them, in a place that really has a lot of great qualities that would make someone want to live there. So I think it comes from that place as well. Why do politicians support Israel? Um, so, it's often pointed to like the pro-Israel lobby or Jewish donors, and also maybe to a lesser extent the Jewish voter base, which I think might only be relevant in Florida, right? There's a lot of Jews in New York, New Jersey, and California, but those are not swing states. So
Hmm.
Florida might be the only place where the Jewish voter base is relevant. But all politicians are vying for, for their funding, and they're gonna support the people or the causes that are going to give them money. So I think a lot of it certainly comes from there. And then, there's the pro-Israel lobby that plays into it. But these are generally things that are generally acknowledged as the reason. So I want to shine light on what I think one of the major causes for support of Israel is that is often missed, and it's really the defense industry, the military-industrial complex. Right, Israel gets $4 billion a year from the United States. 70% of that needs to be spent on U.S. weapons.
Yeah.
So that's essentially just a subsidy for U.S. weapons companies, and the defense lobby is larger than the pro-Israel lobby.
Mm.
Um, so it's that's part of the picture, and it's important to understand that if we want to understand why this like blind, unwavering support, and also I think put lobbies aside, I think the U.S. very much is invested in increasing their sphere of influence. So they're going to support countries that are within their sphere of influence, and that will help them expand it. And Israel is one such country, but Saudi Arabia, who's very different from Israel, also gets not blind support in the same way of like publicly speaking in favor of, but behind the scenes, Saudi Arabia is very much propped up and supported by the United States because it's just beneficial for them.
Same with Egypt. Egypt is also
Yeah,
propped up.
exactly.
I think
Hmm.
almost, a lot of me wonders if the best thing that could happen to Israel is to cut ties with the United States. I know that might feel like, oh, but the United States is the main supporter, and the way Israel's able to, for one, Israel's there. Israel's not going anywhere, and Israeli people who were born and raised there should not have to be forced out. And I'm a big believer. I don't believe in the right to return for anybody. And I'm a big believer of where you're born and where you were raised. That is your home. That is your home. And you have every right to that home as anybody else who was born and raised on that home. Just, I couldn't imagine somebody saying to me, go back to Vietnam. It's like, I've never even been there. I'm an American. I'm from
Right.
here. Um, but I wonder if the best thing that could happen to Israel is to cut ties with the United States, and that would help ease the tensions with the neighbors in the Middle East who have every reason to be very suspicious of the United States and the United States' intentions in that part of the world when the U.S. goes around blowing things up. So, a lot of the tension in the Middle East towards Israel is the thinking that Israel's just a military base for reasons you brought up,
Right.
just an extension of the United States and a colony of the United States just sitting there waiting to strike. And that causes so much tension, just like it does for the Israelis, feeling like Hamas is at our borders ready to strike at any time. That feeling is what all these other Arab nations are feeling, which is little America is right there ready to strike us at any time. And so it almost makes me wonder if the security and safety of Israel would be better if Israel said, we're done with the United States. We're going to pivot towards, I don't know, some other big superpower to help us out. Russia would be a more natural alliance in a lot of ways with a lot of the Russian-speaking people there and a lot of the Russian immigrants. But, so I don't know. That's kind of one of my thoughts, too, is maybe the U.S. is the root of the problem for Israelis.
There's an interesting like horseshoe theory here because I think you have many on the left who would support this and many on the right who would support this. Israelis as well, right? Like I have a few Israeli friends who don't want U.S. funding, and they're generally more right wing, and they just want Israel to be strong and independent and not be
Yeah.
dependent on a foreign nation that has their own interest. It comes from like a place of nationalism. Um, I'm not sure how it would play out. I think if Israel didn't have this kind of like blank check for militarism, would that make them more invested in the peace process, or would it make them kind of more of this like isolationist rogue nation that does whatever they wanted to do? I really don't know how it would play out, but I'd be interested. I'd be open to seeing, and I think more so. I think the 4 billion Israel gets should just not be unconditional. I think it should be conditional in Israel acting in a certain way and progressing the peace process. So I would say if the money's going to come, then it should be conditional on certain terms.
But just like you said, I mean, the money is for the military-industrial complex, so they don't want
Exactly.
peace.
Yeah.
They're not interested
No,
in
they
that.
don't.
They're saying no, more security, more weapons, more war. But I think you said it best. There is no security better than peace, and that's what needs to be had somehow, some way. And people need to start thinking outside of the box in order to get there. in order to get to that point, because it is, I think, existential for all people there in the middle. For Israel in particular, I do think this is getting to a point of existential. I think Israel is going to have if Israel didn't have a target on its back before, or felt like Israel did, Israel certainly does, and it's growing. That target's growing, and that's not diminishing over time. It's just getting worse with people being able to see what's going on against the Palestinians. It's causing more animosity towards the country, and that animosity is beyond the Arab nations. It's now like most of Latin America seems to be feeling that way. You've got a lot of countries that are coming out around the world, and there's no way to point at them and say, well, they're just hostile Arabs that don't want us around. That's not going to hold for a very long time. So I think it's really incumbent, and I hope for the best for the area. I hope for peace as well. Adar, I really appreciate this conversation. I appreciate you risking it and being on, and I think it's worth the risk. I think we would all be very shocked if something happened to you, if you were arrested for speaking about peace. But I guess anything goes during wartime. But I don't think that Israel wants any more bad press. That would be my thinking, my hope anyway.
Right. Yeah. Let's hope for the best. And again, I think it's important for people to speak their truth. And I understand not everybody is in a place where they can where they can take these risks. So I do feel privileged that I'm able to take a risk and maybe get in a little bit of trouble, um, and maybe just leaving it on like this, just positive note of peace and reconciliation. You just mentioned that Israel more people hate Israel than ever before. You know, we faced an atrocity, a horrible atrocity on October 7th, which many people are even trying to minimize and deny. And the Palestinians have faced an atrocity every day since. And it's hard to see the good that can come out of this. But if any good comes out of it, it maybe is a change of the status quo, a new start, and not only the international community, but also Israelis and Palestinians being more dedicated to a peaceful future. So that's really what I hope for. And just to reiterate, those activists around the world, if you care about Israel, if you care about Palestine, look for a solution that provides peace, security for Israelis, and justice for Palestinians. And also recognize that you could give both sides justice. It doesn't just one side doesn't need to have an unjust solution for the other side to get justice, right? So I think this is like a good framework we can work with, and anybody who's fighting the good fight, I commend you. Let's build a shared future together. And Kim, thanks so much for the work that you do and for having me on.
Thank you. And let's tell people again. So you have your YouTube account, Sulha. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Sulha, Sulha. I do these weekly live streams where I have Israelis and Palestinians on for conversation. It's one of the only places where you can actually see Israelis and Palestinians speaking with one another. So it's a different form of content, or sometimes I'll do commentary. And Sulha means to reconcile in Arabic. So that's really the goal of the channel, to reconcile. We focus primarily on Israel-Palestine, but we do branch out to other topics as well.
Well, I highly recommend it. That is how I found you, was actually watching some of your YouTube videos. I highly recommend that people watch these. I think it's an important thing to have. Like I said, I'm an outsider. I don't have any skin in the game, but it's great, I think, when people do have skin in the game, when you've got Israelis and Palestinians talking to one another and trying to facilitate conversation and reconciliation. And I think you bring up really great points. It's important for people to understand that the number one thing for Israelis is security, and the number one thing for Palestinians is justice. And those feelings need to be there for both groups in order to get to an actual solution to this problem. Is that the one thing Palestinians have complained about in the past is that the peace agreements haven't given them justice, and that is what they crave more than anything. And the Israelis need to have that sense of security as well, and those are incredibly important. Under anybody who goes forward in the reconciliation process and the peace process needs to understand that from both sides, that is a feeling that that's not going to go away with both groups.
Yep.
So really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Kim. It's a pleasure.
Well, it's finally here. The cbdistillery.com Black Friday sale is on, and it is incredible. Right now, you can get up to 40% off everything when you use code BF for Black Friday or for best friend, me. Okay, stupid. Anyway, BF 2023 is the code. Choose from a range of expert-formulated CBD and other plant-based solutions for relaxation, stress, sleep, and pain after physical activity, even mood and focus. People absolutely rave about their sleep tinctures and gummies. Imagine that, a calm mind and deep sleep throughout the whole night. Sounds amazing. No artificial colors, no artificial flavors or preservatives or sweeteners. Just 100% clean ingredients. So don't miss this massive sale, massive Black Friday sale, and get up to 40% off your order. Visit cbdistillery.com and enter BF 2023. That's cbdistillery.com and enter BF 2023. Unfortunately, this is not available in my home state of Idaho, Iowa, and South Dakota. All right, guys, that is it for tonight's show. Thank you so much for joining us. Really hope that this was enlightening and informative and entertaining all at the same time. So really appreciate you guys watching. If you have any questions or comments, you can email me, kim@kimiverson.com. Love hearing from you. Would love to get guest recommendations in particular. I'm looking for good guest recommendations for this show. So email me your thoughts on who that might be. Again, that's kim@kimiverson.com. Otherwise, guys, until tomorrow, thanks for joining us. We will see you again, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. Have a great night. Bye-bye.